Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales. Chapter 57-73. Sect Leader Hizai. Nangong Fengyu's face darkened. If someone else sealed the mystic realm from the inside, it would be impossible for them to come out. But Headmaster Hizai was different. No matter where he sealed the mystic realm, he could escape at will. This was because Headmaster Hizai had also mastered the 10,000 Elephants Origin Superposition Technique. It was said that the 10,000 Elephants Origin Stacking Technique was a secret movement technique of the Heavenly Yuan Palace. However, Sect Master Hizai was a cultivator of the Upper State City, and he had actually mastered the 10,000 Elephants Origin Stacking Technique. What was most infuriating was that sect leader Hizai had not only mastered the Manifestation Essence Superposition Technique, but he had also cultivated it to the Nine Supremes realm. The Heavenly Origin Palace's myriad Manifestation Origin Superimposition Technique was generally divided by the 10 Yuan realm. However, this was a very conventional division method. After mastering the Manifestation Origin Superposition Technique, everyone would make certain changes according to their own supreme divine power or supreme domain power. In other words, the Manifestation Origin Stacking Technique would change according to the cultivator's own cultivation method. In the Heavenly Origin Palace, Tang Xiaoyu's change was the most obvious. Ever since Tang Xiaoyu had cultivated the Manifestation Origin Stacking Technique, the Manifestation Origin Stacking Technique had begun to evolve uncontrollably. It could be said that Tang Xiaoyu had created a precedent for the evolution of the Manifestation Origin Stacking Technique. After Headmaster Hizai of Upper Continent City cultivated the Manifestation Origin Stacking Technique, he naturally reached the 10th elemental stage. It was only when Sect Leader Hizai's supreme domain power successfully transformed into domain power that everything changed. Sect Leader Hizai's Manifestation Essence Superposition art had changed as well, becoming the realm of the Nine Supremes. What was surprising was that Sect Leader Hizai seemed to have an innate ability to comprehend the Manifestation Origin Stacking Technique. Within 100 years, he had cultivated the evolved Manifestation Origin Stacking Technique to the state of Nine Supremes. The realm of the Nine Supremes could be considered the great perfection realm of the Manifestation Origin Superposition art. With such a powerful body movement secret technique, it was a piece of cake for him to escape from the sealed secret realm. Because of this, every time Nangong Fengyu thought of this matter, she would feel a bellyful of anger. "Are you sure it's Sect Leader Hizai?" Nangong Fengyu glared at him and asked again. "This subordinate is certain." The man lowered his head and answered submissively. Nangong Fengyu was so angry that she clenched her fists. After a long time, she finally said, "Start the battle." "Yes." The person responded and hurriedly returned. The members of the United Alliance who were waiting here were also ready. Protector Qin Sang, the person who attacked the left protector, Tang Xiaoyu, has left the Heaven's Origin Palace not long ago and is currently heading to the Nightmare region. Someone from the Union Alliance came to report. Qin Sang was one of the protectors of the United Union. Her status was similar to that of the left protector. However, in terms of individual strength, Qin Sang was much stronger than the left protector, and he had already mastered the power of territory. Unlike the left protector who spent most of her time in the outer realm, Protector Qin Sang spent most of her time in the nightmare domain. She had even been to the other world before. Traveling to various places made his combat ability very strong. "You may leave." Qin Sang nodded and took out a voice transmission talisman. Although their target was the entire Heavenly Yuan Palace, they did not care about a mere Heavenly Yuan Palace disciple like Tang Xiaoyu. However, Tang Xiaoyu had attacked and killed the left protector of the United Alliance, so he naturally had to pay the price. The Heaven's Origin Palace was going to be destroyed, and so was Tang Xiaoyu. They would not let him off just because he had left the Heaven's Origin Palace. This concerned the dignity of the United Alliance. The person Qin Sang contacted this time was Gu Tianzi. Gu Tianzi had also come out of the sealed secret realm some time ago and came to the outer realm. He and the left protector seemed to be trying to capture some scarlet genius, but the left protector had been attacked and killed, and Gu Tianzi had returned to the nightmare region. Gu Tianzi was more familiar with Tang Xiaoyu, so it was better to leave this matter to him. Gu Tianzi, stop Tang Xiaoyu. Qin Sang said directly when she contacted Gu Tianzi. I can't stop him. Gu Tianzi's tone sounded a little rushed, as if he had just experienced a great battle. Qin Sang was puzzled. The voice transmission talisman could only contact the other party, not see the other party, so it was impossible to know what Gu Tianzi was doing. I don't know when Tang Xiaoyu and Grasshopper became so close. Grasshopper took Tang Xiaoyu away. Listening to Gu Tianzi's unyielding tone, it seemed that he was still chasing after the two. Grasshopper? Qin Sang was naturally not unfamiliar with this name. Even the entire Union was familiar with the name Grasshopper. Precisely because he was familiar with Grasshopper, he knew that Grasshopper had always been alone. How could he be with Tang Xiaoyu? Gu Tianzi, don't be impulsive. If you really can't do it, go back to the base, Qin Sang said. As soon as he said that, Gu Tianzi's voice transmission talisman was cut off. Qin Sang frowned. He was also curious about why Grasshopper would help Tang Xiaoyu. Grasshopper wants to interfere with us? Nangong Fengyu, who was beside Qin Sang, also heard the conversation between the two, and her brows furrowed. It's just a grasshopper, Qin Sang said indifferently. In Sun City, Xin Che had already contacted Hierarchy Zhe. City Lord, I discovered the secret between the Everlasting Pavilion and the Nangong family. Can you send someone to help? Tian Xingyi and the others did not expect that Hierarchy Zhe, whom Nangong Fengyu was afraid of, would immediately ask for help. Sure, what kind of person do you want? As soon as Xin Che spoke, Hierarchy Zhe displayed the 10,000 Elephants Origin stacking art, which had already reached the level of the 9 Supremes. Junior brother, I'll leave this matter to you. Tian Xingyi looked at the few people present, as well as the soldiers not far away, and still felt that Kong Xinmu was the best candidate. Kong Xinmu was still thinking about Hierarchy Zhe's message when he heard Tian Xingyi's words. Immediately after, Tian Xingyi, Yu Hongfeng, and the others all took a few steps back. Xin Che said solemnly, Scarlet Genius, then I'll leave this matter to you. Then, Kong Xinmu felt a strange movement in the space around him, and then the environment he was in changed. Scarlet Genius, it's our first time meeting. Please advise me. Hierarchy Zhe had heard of Kong Xinmu, and he had also seen the portrait of Kong Xinmu that the Everlasting Pavilion had put up for arrest. He was just a little surprised to see Kong Xinmu here. Please advise me. Kong Xinmu replied politely. Seeing Hierarchy Zhe's appearance, Kong Xinmu was indeed a little surprised. That face could be said to be exactly the same as Cruel's, the only difference was their personalities. Cruel was a person of few words, while Hierarchy Zhe looked more amiable and always had a smile on his face. Brother Jiang, follow me. Hierarchy Zhe explained the situation to Kong Xinmu as they walked. Like the other mountain sects, the Everlasting Pavilion was also located at the peak of a mountain. However, in the main hall of the Everlasting Pavilion at the peak of the mountain, there was actually a teleportation formation. Chapter 57-74. I've already probed, this teleportation array is indeed connected to the Nangong family, but, speaking until here, sect leader Heze's expression became strange. The Nangong family is not as rumored, they are not in seclusion. When I went, the elders were not there, they seemed to be out traveling. Kong Xinmu was stunned. Sect leader Heze's probing was to pass through this teleportation array to the Nangong family? Nangong Fengyu doesn't need to say anything, Nangong Yi should be in the Everlasting Pavilion. As for the other elders, I'm not sure. Kong Shinmu thought for a moment and said. Nan Gongyi likes to reason with people, he has his own principles when making decisions, you don't need to care about this person. Just as sect leader Hizei said this, a hurried buzzing sound suddenly rang out. Immediately, there were several wind-breaking sounds, followed by a stern voice, who dares to trespass my everlasting pavilion's forbidden area? The person who came was Nan Gongyi. Sect leader Hizei did not avoid at all, he turned around and walked out of the hall. Kong Shinmu glanced at the teleportation array on the ground, then followed sect leader Hizei out. A group of disciples wearing the Wuji Pavilion's uniform surrounded the main hall, not letting a single drop of water pass through. The few people in front were the elders of the everlasting pavilion. The one standing in the middle was Nan Gongyi. When Nan Gongyi saw sect leader Hizei, his eyes sunk. Hizei, why are you here? Not long ago, there was news from the everlasting pavilion's secret realm, saying that someone had broken into the secret realm. Then, they were told that the secret realm was sealed from the inside. The people outside could not enter. As for the elders who were in seclusion inside, they did not know their situation. The most surprising thing was that sect leader Hizei entered the everlasting pavilion without anyone noticing. If it wasn't for the huge commotion he caused when he sealed the secret realm, no one would have noticed. Even Nan Gongyi and the others only realized that someone had snuck into the Wuji pavilion when there was a commotion in the secret territory. To be able to easily pass through the everlasting pavilion's formation and enter the everlasting pavilion without exposing any aura, this person's strength must not be underestimated. After some investigation, Nan Gongyi locked onto sect leader Hizei. After a round of investigation, he confirmed that sect leader Hizei had not come out. The pavilion master of the everlasting pavilion ordered the surrounding area to be sealed off and the everlasting pavilion was inspected. Who would have thought that the one who caused the everlasting pavilion's forbidden land to move was actually sect leader Hizei? I relied on my own abilities to get here, Zei said lightly. Hizei, as someone from the upper continent city, you barged into my everlasting pavilion's forbidden area without informing us. Nan Gongyi's face darkened. Do you know your crime? You also know that I'm from the upper continent city. Our city lord has probably beaten up that Nangong Fengyu of yours, and you're still here asking me if I know my crime? Sect leader he glanced at Nan Gongyi, then turned and walked into the secret realm. Nan Gongyi was about to speak when he caught a glimpse of Jiang Shenwu. His expression froze. Why are you here as well? Hierarch Hizei had appeared here because Hizei had mastered the manifestation origin superposition art, which was different from Tianyuan palaces, and had reached the acme of 9 supremes. What about Kong Shinmu? If I said that I was just passing by, would you believe me? Kong Shinmu was right. He was indeed entrusted with an important task without knowing it. Speaking of which, this was his first time coming to the everlasting pavilion. In terms of overall strength, the Limitless Pavilion and the Heavenly Yuan Palace were about the same. However, the Nangong clan had a stronger foundation than the Tianyuan Palace. The inherited power of the Nangong family's bloodline was equivalent to a supreme divine power. In other words, any disciple of the Wuji Pavilion who had inherited the bloodline of the Nangong family, even the weakest cultivator, had mastered the equivalent of 2 supreme divine powers. This was why the everlasting pavilion was so terrifying. Apart from that, there was also the Union Alliance. Judging from the current situation, the United Alliance was obviously biased toward the Wuji Pavilion. Kong Shinmu did not know what kind of conflicts existed between the Heaven Yuan Palace and the United Alliance. The current situation was just an excuse for the United Alliance to annex the Heavenly Yuan Palace. Nangong-yi took a deep look at Kong Shinmu. Everything that happened to the Wuji Pavilion disciples in the sealed mystic realm was done by you? Nangong-yi's words made Kong Shinmu somewhat confused. As sect leader Hizei had said, Nangong-yi had to follow his own principles before making a decision. Nangong Yi, stop talking nonsense. Take those two down quickly. Suddenly, a fierce voice resounded from behind the restricted area, and it exploded through this expanse of the heavens and the earth. It was the pavilion leader of the Wuji Pavilion, Nangong Hongxi. Nangong Hongxi had not arrived at the Wuji Pavilion yet. He was using the Nangong family's telepathic secret technique, a secret technique that could only be inherited by the direct bloodline of the Nangong family. Nangong Hongxi was already infinitely close to the Wuji Pavilion. Although Nangong Yi had his own principles, he unconditionally respected the pavilion leader's orders. Nangong Hongxi gave the order, and Nangong Yi did as he was told. Nangong Hongxi has returned from afar. Aren't you going to welcome him? He glanced at the direction where the voice came from and quickly changed his hand gestures. While Nangong Yi was not paying attention, he activated the formation that had been set up earlier and sent Nangong Yi away. After sealing the mystic realm, He did not stay idle. He used the manifestation origin art of the Nine Supremes realm to set up some formations in the forbidden area of the Wuji Pavilion. The spiritual aura of heaven and earth was vigorous here. Under normal circumstances, the addition of formations would be regarded as a change in the forbidden area. This was also the reason why no one had noticed He at once. After doing all this, He called out to Kong Shinmu and entered the forbidden area again. The person who sent the telepathic message just now was Nangong Hongxi, the pavilion leader of the Wuji Pavilion, He explained to Kong Shinmu. Nangong Hongxi was quite a playboy. He met a woman with the surname Gu when he was wandering outside. They later gave birth to a daughter, Gu Feng. Later, the woman died of illness, and Gu Feng was brought into the Wuji Pavilion. After He's explanation, Kong Shinmu understood Gu Feng's surname and the situation of the Nangong family's bloodline in her body. When both of them entered the forbidden area, Nangong Hongxi returned. Nangong Yi came back with him. Nangong Yi, guard the Wuji Pavilion. I'm going back to the family. Nangong Hongxi's face was extremely gloomy. After a simple explanation, he set off. When Nangong Hongxi entered the forbidden area, Kong Shinmu and He had already activated the transporting formation and successfully teleported away. Nangong Hongxi could not help but frown when he looked at the intact formation on the ground. Based on his understanding of He must have tampered with the transporting formation. What they needed to do now was not to rush to the Nangong family, but to find out where the formation had been tampered with. Chapter 57-75. In the swamp. Jiang Shenwu released his soul consciousness and scanned the surroundings. Right now, he could only use his soul consciousness without using his God Spirit domain. He could only scan within 100 miles of his surroundings. The sky above the swamp was filled with dense fog. It was because of this fog that his soul consciousness couldn't scan. Moreover, as his soul consciousness spread out, the fog started to move. It was like a series of ever-changing formations, causing the swamp to look exceptionally strange. This is the Nangong family's territory. He seemed to know Kong Shinmu's doubts and said. The Nangong family's ancestors were famous for their formations. Although their descendants' cultivation has mostly stopped using formations, there are still some clansmen who continue to use their ancestors' formations. Everything you see here is basically a formation of the Nangong family. As for who set up the formations, I'm not sure. Currently, there are 3 people who have inherited the Nangong family's ancestors' formations. One is not in the outer realm. The other 2 are in the outer realm. They are called Nangong Feng and Nangong Ying. He had roamed the world for years and knew a lot about the Nangong family. Nangong Feng and Nangong Ying were in the outer realm. However, the outer realm was very big. There weren't just the 4 great sections. There were also hundreds of other sections. There were also hundreds of cities of various sizes. Nangong Feng and Nangong Ying were nowhere to be found. One thing was for sure, the two weren't in the Nangong family. They had left the Nangong family years ago to gain experience. Under normal circumstances, secluded families like the Nangong family would choose places to train in the other realm. Most people in the outer realm knew that the other realm was on the other side of the gate of contracts. From a macro perspective, the other realm was a parallel world that coexisted with the outer realm and the nightmare realm. However, if one wanted to break it down, they would have a new understanding of the other realm. If the other realm was like a sect, there were other planes in the other realm. There were many planes in a parallel world. The division of these planes was very simple. It wasn't that whoever was born in a plane belonged to that plane. Whether they could stay or not depended on their strength. The law of the jungle was the law of survival in the other world. Of course, there were weak and strong people in every plane in the other world. The ancient spirits were the most typical representatives of the lowest planes. The ancient spirits were also the most common contracted beings in the contract gate. The experts of the other world were represented by the four great corpse ancestor clans. Kong Shinmu had already obtained the undead spirit flame of the undead spirit clan, one of the four great corpse ancestral clans. Moreover, the dead spirit flame he had obtained was the purest dead spirit flame of the dead spirit race. It was because of this that his supreme godly fire mutated and turned into the supreme godly fire. The supreme domain power of the supreme divine flame would only be comprehended after devouring the power left behind in the domain world of ancestor Jiangshu. As for what kind of world the other world was, those who had been there all said that it was very complicated. Compared to the complexity of the other world, the real problem was how to get to the other world. When it came to heading to the other world, the bipolar mirror had to be mentioned. The bipolar mirror could open a passage between the two worlds, allowing one to travel freely. As a magic artifact that could open a passage between the two worlds, the bipolar mirror was not the only one. Correspondingly, the bipolar mirror was a must-have for cultivators who were infinitely close to becoming law masters. From a certain perspective, the bipolar mirror was a commodity that could be used for trading. There was also the star map lock that had similar attributes to the bipolar mirror. The star map lock was a type of space-type magic artifact. The type of space opened by the star map lock was related to the soul, consciousness, and domain power of the cultivator who owned the star map lock. The stronger these two powers were, the more powerful the space opened would be. The essence of the star map lock was a type of space teleportation magic artifact. If the bipolar mirror could open a passage between the two worlds, the star map lock would be the passage that connected the two worlds. However, compared to the simplicity of the bipolar mirror, the usage of the star map lock was more complicated. This was also why, in the sealed secret realm, many cultivators preferred the star map lock over fighting for the fragment of the seven devouring demon sealing art. Of course, the core of the star map lock, which was also the seal, should not be forgotten. For a family like the Nangong family with enough resources, they definitely had a lot of bipolar mirrors. Therefore, it was not difficult for them to go to the other world. Nangong Feng and Nangong Ying had returned from the other world 100 years ago. Although they did not return to the Nangong family or the Wuxia pavilion, they had always been in the outer realm. According to what Headmaster Hizhe knew, Nangong Feng and Nangong Ying were still in the outer realm. Moreover, the village they were in was not far from the passage to the nightmare region. Headmaster Hizhe told Kong Shinmu about these things. After hearing where Nangong Feng and Nangong Ying were, Kong Shinmu's heart sank. They're not far from the nightmare region? Back at Heavenly Yuan Palace, Tian Xing had mentioned that Tang Xiaoyu's Tang village was in the nightmare region. That's right. Hizhe nodded. You're worried about Tang Xiaoyu, right? Don't worry, I'll keep an eye on him. Kong Shinmu heaved a sigh of relief. The two of them looked at the swamp. There were a total of 10 small arrays where they were standing. The foundations of the 10 formations were different, but they all use spatial barriers as a medium. This is where the Nangong family is. Brother Jiang, I'll leave the task of breaking the formations to you. I'll go borrow someone. As soon as Sect Master Heezy finished speaking, his figure disappeared from the spot. When he disappeared, Kong Shinmu's soul didn't sense anything. If he hadn't activated his God Spirit domain, he wouldn't have sensed Headmaster Heezy's aura. In the perception of the God Spirit domain, Sect Leader Heezy shuttled through space as he pleased, as if he was in an ordinary place, not leaving any traces. None of the formations in front of him, including the spatial barriers, could stop Headmaster Heezy. Headmaster Heezy moved through the formations as if they were flat ground. Soon, he disappeared into the boundary not far away. Kong Shinmu was a little surprised. He could basically sense Headmaster Heezy's cultivation. The aura he released was still a Supreme God's power. To be able to do this, it meant that his Supreme God's domain had reached the 9th level. He might even have comprehended his own domain power. His Supreme God's power had probably reached the 9th level long ago, infinitely close to the realm of laws. Who goes there? In the next moment, a loud and clear rebuke resounded across the horizon. Following that, all the formations in the swamp were activated one by one. This scene stunned Kong Shinmu. The formations were activated one after another. Very quickly, the Nangong family's disciples discovered Kong Shinmu's existence. Before these people arrived, Kong Shinmu already felt strong auras of supreme divine powers and all sorts of supreme martial techniques. Needless to say, the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance's replication power was indeed terrifying. It could replicate any kind of power, and the strength of the replicated power was not inferior to the strength of the replicated power. Even though these forces were very strong, Kong Shinmu was no longer the same as before. Not only had his supreme divine spiritual flame reached the 9th level, but he had also mastered the divine spiritual domain. Kong Shinmu sensed the incoming forces and the array formation in front of him. Without hesitation, he released his God spiritual domain. The moment the God spiritual domain was released, he sensed all the formation foundations, including the formation's operation path. Everything was under Kong Shinmu's control. This was the first time Kong Shinmu truly released his God spiritual domain after Kong Shinmu mastered it. The moment the God spiritual domain spread, the sky above the swamp was instantly filled with a red aura. Immediately after, a scorching heat suddenly swept across, burning the swamp that was covered by the divine realm to ashes. Kong Shinmu saw a passage. His soul consciousness sensed that there was another world at the end of the passage. There was also an unknown power and formation. He guessed that the Nangong family's residence was at the end of the passage. Kong Shinmu retracted his God spiritual domain and entered the passage. His soul consciousness sensed that the passage was very long, but after Kong Shinmu entered, he found that the passage was very short. Soon, he reached the end of the passage. Just as his soul consciousness sensed, there was another world at the end of the passage. It was a brand new world. The first thing that entered his eyes was a tall and majestic palace. The palace was surrounded by clouds and mist, and it looked like a fairyland. After coming to this place from the swamp, there was a cliff road. At that moment, Kong Shinmu was at the edge of the cliff. The tall palace that stood in the clouds and mist was separated from him by a deep abyss. Above the abyss, there was also smoke curling up, and it covered the scene at the bottom of the abyss. This smoke was actually a type of supreme God power, and it obstructed the true appearance of the abyss. Not only was the smoke floating above the abyss a type of supreme God power, but even the surroundings of the cliff and the fog surrounding the palace were also supreme God power. Moreover, this supreme God power was not a single supreme God power. There were several types of supreme God power mixed in. Most importantly, Kong Shinmu's devouring power could not devour this supreme god power at will. A portion of the devouring power that he released was instead devoured by the supreme god power. Kong Shinmu could clearly sense that the portion of the devouring power that he released was cut off by the supreme god power. From this, it could be concluded that this supreme god power was not the power of nature of the supreme god power, but the supreme god power that was mastered by the cultivator. Just what kind of cultivator could release his supreme divine power at will and exist in this place? The most frightening thing was that there was not only one or two types of supreme god power floating here, but there were several types of supreme god power. This was only the supreme god power that Kong Shinmu could roughly sense. There was a distance from the palace, and Kong Shinmu could not clearly sense how many types of supreme god power there were around the palace. Kong Shinmu focused and prepared to cross the abyss. Just as he took a step forward, he felt a gust of cold air coming from the bottom of the abyss. This cold air came very suddenly, and it disappeared just as suddenly. Kong Shinmu gathered his supreme soul power, passed through the supreme god power floating above the abyss, and fell into the abyss. Soon, he sensed the situation at the bottom of the abyss. The bottom of the abyss was just the bottom of an ordinary cliff, and there was a river at the bottom of the cliff. The strange thing was this river. This river had no source, and there was no end to it. It just suddenly appeared at the bottom of the cliff. Kong Shinmu released the supreme space power, and used it to go directly to the bottom of the abyss. He observed the river at the bottom of the abyss at a close distance, and the river was indeed a river. However, there seemed to be some kind of supreme god power of nature hidden in the river. Kong Shinmu's first reaction was to think of the supreme water power of nature. However, he quickly sensed the situation in the river, and there was no aura of the supreme water power. The cold in the river meant that the supreme god power of nature hidden in the river was very close to the water or ice attribute. However, Kong Shinmu was very sure that there was no supreme water power of nature, or supreme ice power of nature. Chapter 57-77. The supreme god power here was mostly the power of supreme cultivators, while the supreme holy ice power was a single-element supreme god power. This meant that up until now, there were no supreme cultivators who possessed the supreme holy ice power. In that case, the supreme holy ice power would now exist in the natural world as the power of nature. Since that was the case, it was unlikely that the supreme holy ice power's power of nature existed here. However, the aura of the supreme god power emanating from the river was extremely familiar to Kong Shinmu. Not only that, but Kong Shinmu also sensed that the supreme holy ice domain that was hidden in his mind, consciousness, and sea of consciousness was moving strangely. With that thought, Kong Shinmu jumped into the river. The supreme god power of nature in the river suddenly swept over and gathered towards Kong Shinmu. It was the supreme holy ice power's power of nature. The entire river was the supreme holy ice power's power of nature. Kong Shinmu was in the river, and he was surrounded by the supreme holy ice power's power of nature. The supreme holy ice domain that had existed in his mind, consciousness, and sea of consciousness for a long time also started to churn. Soon, the supreme holy ice domain's power of nature spread out and covered the entire river. The supreme holy ice power's power of nature was affected by the supreme holy ice domain's power, and it started to churn rapidly. It had always been thought that every supreme cultivator would be able to comprehend the supreme holy ice domain's power of nature after they grasped supreme god power and reached a certain realm. Under normal circumstances, supreme cultivators would first grasp supreme god power, and then comprehend the supreme holy ice power's power of nature. For example, Kong Shinmu had long obtained the supreme holy ice domain's power of nature. There was no precedent for him to see the supreme holy ice power of nature's power of nature. Kong Shinmu was the first person to first possess the supreme holy ice domain's power of nature before coming into contact with the supreme holy ice power of nature's power of nature. At that moment, Kang Shinmu did not know how to contain the boundless supreme holy ice power of nature's power of nature's power of nature. After being enveloped by the supreme holy ice domain's power, the supreme holy ice's power in the river resonated with the power of nature and started to surge. The devouring power swept out and began to devour the power of the supreme holy ice. In a few seconds, all the supreme holy ice power in the river had been devoured, and the river disappeared. It turned out that this river was formed from the supreme holy ice's nature energy. Now that the supreme holy ice's nature energy was devoured, the river disappeared. The power of the supreme sacred ice domain quickly returned to his sea of consciousness. The power of the supreme holy ice that was devoured by the devouring power did not enter his mind and sea of consciousness. Instead, it entered his meridians and gathered together. Thus, Kang Shinmu began to activate his cultivation technique. The moment he activated his cultivation technique, the power of nature of the supreme holy ice in his chi meridian also started to circulate. After that, Kang Shinmu comprehended the refining process. This process did not last too long, and Kang Shinmu was forced to stop his comprehension. It did not mean that he could casually comprehend the power of nature of the supreme holy ice just because he had the supreme sacred ice domain's power. On the contrary, Kang Shinmu already had the supreme sacred ice domain's power, and he had a certain level of understanding of it. However, he was still unable to comprehend the power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power in a short period of time. However, there was one thing that surprised him. The power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power had been circulating in his meridians, and it did not have any intention of entering his mind and consciousness. Furthermore, it could not be absorbed by the extreme 10-devil seal. Although the power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power remained in such a state, it did not seem to hinder him from using other supreme powers. Kang Shinmu did not care about it for the time being. The entire river at the bottom of this abyss was filled with the power of nature of the supreme holy ice. After Kang Shinmu absorbed it, the river disappeared, and its original appearance was revealed. It was still a river. However, this river was normal water. From time to time, some living creatures would float across the river. Kang Shinmu followed the river for a distance, and only left when he realized that there was no longer any power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power in the river. Although he had just devoured a large amount of the power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power, it was not all of the power of nature in the natural world. According to the power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power circulating in his meridians, Kang Shinmu roughly determined that the power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power that he had devoured was just the tip of the iceberg in the natural world. After releasing his consciousness to check again, and confirming that there were no abnormalities, Kang Shinmu flew away. Before leaving, Kang Shinmu sensed that the source of the river was a huge forest. There were many paths in the forest, and there were also the auras of some unfamiliar living creatures. This was a place that his soul lock had not detected previously. At this moment, after devouring all the power of nature of the supreme holy ice's power, he sensed the source of the river. From here, he could see that the source of the river was in the direction of the Nangong family. Correspondingly, he could also detect the end of the river. At the end of the river, Kang Shinmu's soul lock's detection was not very obvious. However, combined with the power of the Supreme Soul, he could detect the end of the river. It was a swamp. Not only that, with the power of the Supreme Soul, Kang Shinmu's soul lock could ignore the surrounding formation and directly detect the true appearance of the surrounding terrain. Previously, he had relied on the power of the Supreme Soul to barely fight with Wanzong. At this moment, the power of the Supreme Soul actually ignored the enhancement of the formation and boundary. Kang Shinmu was curious about the power of the Supreme Soul. Originally, he had devoured the power of the Supreme Soul from the Fu Shui tribe's elder. All along, Kang Shinmu had treated this power as an ordinary power of the Supreme Soul. If he had to say that it was different from other power of the Supreme Soul, it would be a power that could affect one's soul lock. In other words, it was a spiritual power. As his cultivation base improved and his experience deepened, the power of the Supreme Soul displayed started to change Kang Xinmu's view of it. Perhaps he did not understand what kind of power the power of the Supreme Soul was from the beginning. Coupled with the limitations of his own power, the power of the Supreme Soul was limited to the extent of his own power. After withdrawing the power of the Supreme Soul, Kang Xinmu realized that even though his soul lock was very strong, he could not clearly detect the end of the river. Kang Xinmu adjusted his power. Just as he was about to fly above the abyss, he was suddenly stopped by a bolt of lightning. A thick bolt of lightning suddenly fell from above the abyss and headed straight for Kang Xinmu. Chapter 57-78. The lightning struck the side of the river and created a deep pit, splashing water everywhere. However, the lightning did not disappear. Instead, it changed its direction and attacked Kang Xinmu again. The gray lightning, which was 10 feet thick, locked onto Kang Xinmu and came at him ferociously. At first, Kang Xinmu was still dodging the lightning attack. As time passed, Kang Xinmu realized that the lightning was actually a formation. As long as the formation base was not broken, the formation would continue to exist, and the lightning would also continue to exist. Moreover, Kang Xinmu realized that the lightning would continue to grow stronger as the formation operated. In other words, if he did not break the formation in a short time, the lightning would only become stronger as time passed. However, when Kang Xinmu devoted himself to breaking the formation, he realized that it was not as easy to break as it seemed on the surface. This was a position-type formation, and it was a formation that was a combination of multiple formations. This made Kang Xinmu think of the position-type formation that existed in Gufeng's bloodstain. This must be the formation of the Nangong family. After understanding more, Kang Xinmu also realized that this formation hid the power of a domain. From this, it could be concluded that this formation was set up by an expert who had mastered the power of a domain. The power of the domain in the formation was a kind of sword energy domain. This also meant that the cultivator who set up the formation was a cultivator who had mastered the power of a sword energy domain. After understanding the existence of the sword energy domain in the formation, Kang Xinmu made a new discovery. The 10 feet thick lightning was not the power of lightning. Instead, it was the power condensed by several rays of sword energy. The entire lightning was the power condensed by sword energy. The lightning that appeared on the surface was all the manifestation of the sword chi. Even though this was a formation, its essence was still the power of a domain. Against the power of a domain, one would naturally need to use the power of a domain. Kang Xinmu did not hesitate to release the power of the divine domain. In an instant, the bottom of the abyss was filled with darkness. As far as the eye could see, there was only darkness. This was one of the visual forms of Kang Xinmu's divine territory. Although it was dark everywhere, Kang Xinmu could clearly see anything within the range of the divine territory. The essence of this divine spirit domain was the supreme divine spirit flame. Although it appeared to be completely dark, there were also fragments of flame power burning within it. In other words, it was a mysterious flame power that spread throughout the entire divine realm. That bolt of lightning was now surrounded by the power of the black flames and trapped in the divine spirit domain. That wasn't all. Immediately after, the flame of the undead was released and engulfed the lightning. The lightning that was engulfed by the flame of the dead spirits instantly released the sword chi domain. For a time, sword chi burst forth and illuminated the dark divine domain. The divine spirit domain suddenly changed from black to white. When it changed, the flame of the dead spirits surged continuously where the black and white colors intersected. It engulfed all the sword chi that erupted from the lightning. The sword chi was shaking violently, trying to break free from the flame of the dead spirits' restraint. However, the flame of the dead spirits emitted waves of scorching heat as it attempted to refine the sword chi that surged out. The thunderbolt formation was activated along with the surging of the sword chi. Perhaps because it could not break free from the divine spirit domain, the formation hidden in the lightning activated a position-type formation on the spot. For a time, the divine spirit domain, which was a combination of black and white, was divided. The moment the position-type formation was unleashed, it was first divided into 2, then into 4, and so on and so forth. Kang Shinmu could not stop the position-type formation from dividing the divine spirit domain for a while. However, as the divine spirit domain was divided, Kang Shinmu also realized the essence of the position-type formation. It treated the divine spirit domain as a kind of space and divided it repeatedly before finally forming a position-type formation. From a certain point of view, this formation was also equivalent to a space-type sorcery. Kang Shinmu was very familiar with anything related to space-type secret sorcery. Without hesitation, he released the supreme power of space. With the help of the supreme power of space, Kang Shinmu found the base of the position-type formation in the lightning. Without any hesitation, he quickly retracted the divine spirit domain. As the range of the divine spirit domain decreased, the position-type formation in the lightning stopped dividing and released the sword chi domain. Initially, there were only a few sword chi released. However, as the position-type formation continued to divide the space, the number of sword chi released increased exponentially. Moreover, the power of the sword chi kept increasing. In less than a breath's time, countless sword chi formed a giant sword. Kang Shinmu recognized this sword. It was the Xianming Thunder Sword. The Xianming Thunder Sword was a sacred item that was comparable to the Great Devil Seal of 10 Directions. Kang Shinmu didn't expect to encounter the Xianming Thunder Sword at this time. Although the Xianming Thunder Sword in front of him was just a shadow formed by countless sword chi in the formation, it didn't reduce the deterrence of the Xianming Thunder Sword at all. Kang Shinmu couldn't help but sigh. The Xianming Thunder Sword, which had been missing for a long time, was actually in the Nangong family outside the domain. He also knew very well that it wasn't the time to sigh about the power of the Xianming Thunder Sword. What he needed to do now was to break the power of the Xianming Thunder Sword's sword chi domain. Originally, Kang Shinmu planned to break the position-type formation's base directly. However, Kang Shinmu changed his mind. He wanted to change the base of the formation and integrate his domain power into it so that he could use the formation that condensed the Xianming Thunder Sword's sword chi domain power. With that thought in mind, Kang Shinmu did it. Kang Shinmu covered the entire divine spirit domain with the supreme space power. He used the special space of the supreme space power and the domain power of the divine spirit domain to break the formation. After a round of fighting, Kang Shinmu experienced the power of the Xianming Thunder Sword. Although it was just a sword energy shadow, it could still cut the space formed by the supreme space power. Not long after, the space formed by Kang Shinmu's supreme space power was directly broken by the Xianming Thunder Sword's sword energy shadow. The Xianming Thunder Sword's sword energy shadow only cut the space formed by the supreme space power, but it didn't pose any threat to the divine spirit domain. This was enough to prove that the power of Kang Shinmu's divine spirit domain was enough to compete with the sword energy domain. Kang Shinmu focused again and activated the 9 seals of the Great Devil Seal of 10 Directions. Since the Xianming Thunder Sword was also a sacred item, he would use a sacred item to deal with a sacred item. The 9 seals of the Great Devil Seal of 10 Directions were all activated in an instant. The power of one of the seals rushed towards the shadow of the Xianming Thunder Sword. The shadow of the Xianming Thunder Sword was just a shadow formed by the many sword energies in the sword chi domain. As long as the formation wasn't destroyed, the sword energies would still exist. Just like now, although the formed Xianming Thunder Sword was suppressed by one of the seals of the Great Devil Seal of 10 Directions. However, a new shadow of the Xianming Thunder Sword was forming. Chapter 5779. It turned out that the supreme spatial force could only limit the division of the formation, but it could not break the formation from its roots. Kang Xinmu simply retracted the supreme spatial force. He focused and released the power of the Supreme Soul. The moment the power of the Supreme Soul was released, the division of the formation suddenly stopped. Kang Xinmu was pleasantly surprised. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he forcefully stopped the division of the formation and swallowed the sword Qi domain. When the power of the Supreme Soul was released, it was mixed with the consciousness of the soul. The power of the Supreme Sacred Ice domain had always existed in the sea of consciousness of the soul. At this moment it was also released at the same time, and condensed in the foundation of the formation along with the power of the Supreme Soul. When changing the foundation of the formation, Kang Xinmu keenly discovered an unfamiliar power. It was the power of nature of the power of the Supreme Sacred Ice. After this power was swallowed, it had always existed in the Qi meridian, constantly circulating in an irregular manner. At this moment, this power completely surged into the foundation of the formation. When the foundation of the formation was changed, the power of nature of the Supreme Sacred Ice was finally no longer stagnant in the Qi meridian, but remained in the foundation of the formation. In the end, the formation took the form of the Xian Ming Thunder Sword, which was the size of a palm. Generally speaking, formations existed in a virtual form. Only when a cultivator set up a formation according to certain steps during a battle would the formation appear in the form it should have. However, the formation was different from other formations. Most of them would be attached to a Dharma artifact to release them. In essence, they could be considered a type of Dharma artifact. When the formation was refined to the great success stage, it would exist in a physical form. For example, the formation that Kang Xinmu had put away at this moment was a kind of formation that was attached to the Xian Ming Thunder Sword, so it was in the form of the Xian Ming Thunder Sword. For this kind of formation, as long as the foundation of the formation was changed, one could obtain the right to use it. Now that Kang Xinmu had changed the foundation of the formation, he became the new owner of the Xian Ming Thunder Sword formation. After putting away the formation, Kang Xinmu was about to leave. As soon as he took a step forward, he discovered that his surroundings had changed greatly. He was originally at the bottom of the abyss, but now, there was only a river around him, and there were no cliffs on either side. Not far ahead was the forest that he had sensed earlier. The abyss disappeared? Kang Xinmu looked around and suddenly thought of a possibility. The abyss that he saw just now was actually the Xian Ming Thunder Sword Formation Array Formation. Now that the Xian Ming Thunder Sword's array formation had been broken, the abyss would naturally disappear. Kang Xinmu had just moved a short distance when he was stopped by several figures standing in front of him. These people looked to be in their 30s or 40s. They all wore the same uniform and each of them held a 3-foot-long sword in their hands. It wasn't hard to tell that they were members of the Nangong family. Moreover, from the looks of it, these people had been waiting for a long time. When they saw Kang Xinmu appear here, apart from anger, there was also surprise on their faces. "Who are you?" His berating voice was filled with anger. While he was questioning Kang Xinmu, he carefully glanced behind Kang Xinmu. "I'm looking for someone." Kang Xinmu thought for a while and said. Speaking of which, it was strange. He had clearly followed Hizei into the swamp, but he didn't see Hizei at all along the way. Hizei had said something about breaking the array formation and then going to borrow someone. Although the breaking array formation was this Xian Ming Thunder Sword Formation Array Formation. As for borrowing someone, looking at the current situation, Hizei probably didn't manage to borrow anyone. Kang Xinmu still couldn't figure out who Hizei wanted to borrow and why the person was in the Nangong family. He seems to be the Kang Xinmu that second elder mentioned. Didn't they say that Kang Xinmu couldn't break through the array formation? From the looks of it, even the Xian Ming Thunder Sword Formation Array Formation seems to have been broken. Even so, look at his appearance. He really looks very similar to that outsider called Kong Xinmu. These disciples were just ordinary members of the Nangong family. Naturally, they had never seen Kong Xinmu before. They had only heard about Kong Xinmu from a few elders. Looking at the person in front of them now, they couldn't be sure if this person was Kong Xinmu. Did you see a person? Kong Xinmu roughly described Heizei's appearance. The disciples present shook their heads one by one. They didn't take this matter to heart. They just thought that it was just a pretense that Kong Xinmu used to muddle through, so they directly attacked Kong Xinmu. Although these Nangong family disciples were all around the 6th level of Supreme Divine Power cultivators, none of them were weak. In addition, the Nangong family's bloodline inheritance was rather special. It was equivalent to each of them having 2 types of Supreme Divine Power. Not only that, but the power of the Supreme Divine Power would also increase exponentially. It was undeniable that these Nangong family disciples in front of them were indeed very strong. However, compared to Kong Xinmu, they were still too weak. Kong Xinmu only needed 1 strike to defeat all these Nangong family disciples. Then, he dashed forward. At the same time, in the Nangong family, Heizei quietly arrived at the Nangong family. Basically, none of the Nangong family disciples noticed Heizei's arrival. Only a few of them saw Heizei with their own eyes. They realized that Heizei's clothes were different from theirs, so they became suspicious. In an instant, the entire Nangong family became vigilant. Heizei's 10,000 elephants origin superposition technique's 9 Supremes realm had reached the point where he could freely shuttle through space without being easily detected. People at the same level of cultivation as Heizei might not be able to detect Heizei's 10 Supremes realm. Heizei's supreme divine power was related to space techniques. It was the supreme shape-shifting power. The supreme shape-shifting power, as the name suggested, was a kind of power that could transform. The supreme shape-shifting power of the 10 Supremes realm could freely shuttle through space. Coupled with his 9th level supreme shape-shifting power, he could erase the traces left behind after shuttling through space, and thus reach the point where he could come and go without a trace. The premise was that Heizei's opponent's cultivation base was below the 9th level, or at the 9th level. Of course, there were some 9th level Supreme Realm cultivators who could use their own outstanding domain power to restrain Heizei's 10 Supremes Realm 10 Supremes Realm 10 Supremes Realm. Heizei did not pay attention to the Nangong family disciples. Although he was discovered, he did not plan to stay for long. After strolling around the library, he had a general understanding of the Nangong family's terrain. Heizei directly went to the southern suburbs of the Nangong family. There was a courtyard that occupied an area like a mountain. Heizei came to the courtyard's entrance as if there was no one else around. He did not knock on the door and directly rushed in. However, Heizei, who had come here without any obstacles, quickly ran into a wall. The seemingly simple wooden door was actually attached with the Xian Ming Thunder Sword's array formation. Heizei really did not expect this. What he was least good at was passing through the Xian Ming Thunder Sword's array formation. The Xian Ming Thunder Sword was a heaven and earth saint item. The array formation set up by it would form a sword chi domain, thus dividing space. Even if his 10,000 elephants origin superposition technique had reached the 9th Supremes realm, he could not barge in rashly. Chapter 5780. The people in the courtyard had already sensed Heizei's forceful entrance. Who is it? The voice that came from the house was very young. It's your elder brother. Heizei circled to the side of the courtyard. There was no Xian Ming Thunder Sword formation here, so he used the 10,000 elephants origin superposition technique without hesitation and entered the courtyard. Coincidentally, the person in the house walked out. It was a teenager who looked to be in his teens. Nangong Yuani, come with me. Heizei grabbed the teenager's arm and led him away. Who are you? Where are you taking me? Nangong Yuani did not know Hizei. Just as he was feeling puzzled, he saw the second elder arrive. Second elder, do you know him? Nangong Yuani asked doubtfully. Venerable, he is a thief who trespassed into the Nangong family. Please help us take him down. The second elder of the Nangong family said respectfully. Oh. Nangong Yuani looked at Hizei doubtfully. His slightly raised eyebrows seemed to be asking Hizei for confirmation. How could Hizei admit that he was a thief who trespassed into the Nangong family? He immediately denied it. Yuani, don't listen to his nonsense. He is old and has a bad memory. He might have mistaken me for someone else. The second elder's eyes widened when he heard Hizei's words, and he looked at him in disbelief. He never expected Hizei to be so thick-skinned as to lie through his teeth. Nangong Yuani felt that Hizei's words made sense, and he could not help but ponder them. Yuani, come with me. Hizei hurried over and carried Nangong Yuani. He used the 10,000 elephants origin superposition technique of the 9 Supremes and left the courtyard in the blink of an eye. Everything happened too suddenly. By the time the second elder reacted, Hizei and Nangong Yuani had already disappeared. Someone. The second elder shouted and hurriedly chased after them. The moment he chased after them, he ran into the fifth elder and seventh elder. The moment they saw the second elder's expression, they knew what had happened. Not daring to delay, they quickly sealed off the entire Nangong family. Nangong Yuani's original body was the lifeline of the Nangong family's bloodline. 10,000 years ago, he had first developed intelligence. Over the next several thousand years, he had absorbed the essence of the world and transformed into a human, which was how he looked now. However, Nangong Yuani had been cultivating here ever since he had taken on a human form. He had never left the Nangong clan and rarely interacted with the other clansmen. He would never judge others and would always seek confirmation for himself. Hizei knew Nangong Yuani because he had accidentally snuck into the Nangong family. However, he didn't enter the Nangong family through the teleportation formation, so it could be considered an opportunity. It was his first time coming into contact with the bipolar mirror. When the bipolar mirror was activated, he fell into the Nangong family. After returning, the bipolar mirror was also damaged and was still under repair. As the lifeline of the Nangong family, Nangong Yuani held absolute power. The conflict between the Limitless Pavilion and the Heavenly Origin Palace had long been premeditated by the United Alliance. This time, they were just using it as a pretext. It was reasonable for the Nangong family to intervene in the Everlasting Pavilion's matter. Even if the United Alliance helped the Limitless Pavilion, the Heavenly Origin Palace could accept it. After all, the United Alliance's base was in the Pinnacle region. Although the passageway from the Pinnacle region to the Outer Realm was open for a long time, the number of cultivators who could pass through each time was limited. The Pinnacle region United Alliance could not send a large number of people in such a short period of time. Once Nangong Yuani joined the battle, the war would be over. Hizei was well aware of this, so he was determined to send Nangong Yuani out of the Nangong family. As soon as Kong Shinmu arrived at the foot of the Nangong family's mountain, he heard the sirens of the Nangong family. He concluded that Hizei had caused a commotion and hurried into the Nangong family's territory. However, he didn't expect that the Nangong family's mountain gate was protected by the Xianming lightning sword formation, so he couldn't force his way in. Not only that, but he also attracted the attention of the Nangong family. Coincidentally, the third elder came over. In order to stop Hizei and Nangong Yuani, he released his supreme divine power without even looking. The supreme divine power that the third elder of the Nangong family possessed was the supreme shadow force, and he cultivated in the direction of binding. Combined with the inherited power of the Nangong family's bloodline, he could form a spatial prison. Once trapped in this kind of spatial prison, even Hizei would have to spend a lot of effort to break out of it. The moment Kang Shinmu sensed the aura of his opponent's supreme divine power, he dodged it. The third elder was well aware of Heizei's movement technique. He was famous for the Nine Supremes' Thousand Elephants origin art. If he wanted to avoid the spatial prison, he would have to use the Thousand Elephants origin art. Thus, the third elder had already set up a trap when he used his supreme divine power. If Heizei used the Thousand Elephants origin art, he would be trapped in the spatial prison. However, the third elder never expected this. He didn't expect that the intruder would use the simplest movement technique to avoid his supreme divine power. When he took a closer look, he saw that the person who appeared at the mountain gate wasn't Heizei, but an unfamiliar young man. Looking at him and sensing his aura, the third elder quickly recognized Kang Shinmu's identity. The Scarlet Genius, Kang Shinmu. After Kang Shinmu's name became famous in the Everlasting Pavilion, it gradually spread in the Nangong family as well. The Nangong family could hear about some of Kang Shinmu's deeds in the sealed mystic realm at any time. The person in question, Kang Shinmu, did not know about these rumors. Hearing the word Scarlet Genius from the Nangong family's elder, Kang Shinmu's expression was a little strange. Hand him over. The Nangong family's third elder thought that it was Kang Shinmu who had come to Heizei's aid, so he shouted. When Kang Shinmu heard this, he concluded that Heizei had borrowed the person. Aren't they not out yet? Kang Shinmu suddenly changed the topic and asked. Don't play dumb. Aren't you here to help him? You are still here, so of course they haven't come out yet. The third elder's face was gloomy. Who is the person he is borrowing? Kang Shinmu looked at the Nangong family's situation. Not only was the third elder tense, but the other disciples were also extremely cautious. When the third elder heard Kang Shinmu's words, he thought that Kang Shinmu was provoking the Nangong family. Without saying anything, he immediately attacked. Kang Shinmu's soul consciousness had already locked onto the third elder. At this moment, when the third elder attacked, he used his fastest speed to dodge the third elder's supreme divine power attack. Kang Shinmu was not unfamiliar with the supreme shadow power. However, the third elder's supreme shadow power in front of him clearly leaned towards the binding attribute. Combined with the Nangong family's replication power, it could directly form a spatial prison. As for Kang Shinmu, he was also afraid of the spatial prison. After all, he had not cultivated the supreme space power to the great perfection realm, and his understanding of space wasn't very clear. If he was trapped inside, he could get lost in the spatial prison. Moreover, he couldn't blindly use spatial magic to deal with this kind of spatial prison. If he made any mistakes, he would fall into the spatial prison.